we can create more of a team approach for somebody so that they ultimately are getting their needs met. When we're connecting then with someone who's experienced trauma, and you've mentioned how meeting with someone would go hand in hand with them having the neurofeedback protocol. Can you talk a little bit about how that partners?
You mean like the therapy part?
Yes.
Okay, yes. That's actually what I wanted to talk about. So perfect question. Okay. So, yes, neurofeedback, I tell my clients, is not a standalone treatment. The only time that it would probably be a standalone treatment is when we have people who are coming in for peak performance training. Someone who's just wanting to improve their brains or sports related stuff. But what neurofeedback is doing, it is optimizing your brain. It is regulating your brain. But then there's other tools out there. There's other factors that are important as well. And so with all of our clients, we go back to the basics. And the first thing that we talk about is sleep, nutrition, and movement. All of those are so important when it comes to supporting your brain and supporting your body. So because if someone is not getting good sleep, if they're just staying on their phone all night, if you're eating, fast food all the time and not moving your body, then neurofeedback's really only going to be able to do a little bit. It's really important to prioritize feeding your body nutrients, getting in protein. So Dr. On did a study on a kid. It was 3 days. There was one day that they came in with no breakfast. There was one day they came in with a sugary breakfast. And then the third day they came in and they had a nutritious breakfast focused with protein. The first day that they came in, their brain waves, all of what he saw was related to anxiety symptoms. You're going to be more anxious if you don't have anything in your system. The second day, whenever there was, the sugary breakfast, there was still some signs of the anxiety related waves, but then the ADHD type waves popped up. So that would make sense, right? But then the third day, whenever she came in with a nutritious protein filled breakfast, her EEG was normalized. None of that stuff came up. And so it's just so important. Like what we feed our bodies does have a huge impact on our brain, and that's how we're going to operate. Sleep is so critical because that's the time when our brain is washing out all of the toxins and, the steps that we need to try to reduce neuroinflammation and have the healing that our brain needs. And then movement, that is just going to build resiliency with your nervous system. If we have a stronger, healthier heart and body, then whenever we are impacted with stress, then our body is going to be able to recoup much quicker. But then beyond the basics, we also like to look at labs. It's very critical to look at labs because sometimes our issues can be fed by something as simple as like a low vitamin D or a thyroid issue or something like that. So we like to roll up that. And then there's the talk therapy part which I feel like talk therapy can relate to what the Bible says, because in the Bible, God talks about, gratitude and not living in fear, not living in anxiety. And, that is helpful, but then it's kind of like, well, how can we get that way? So we can learn tips, tricks, tools to help us live in that state. And so for me and my experience with neurofeedback, I knew a lot of these therapy tools beforehand. I use a cognitive behavioral therapy approach. And so that's reframing our thoughts, questioning our thoughts, asking if there's, validity of facts for what we were thinking. And I knew these things, but it was really hard to apply them based off of how my brain was wired. But what I noticed was after my neurofeedback experience, it was so much easier for me to talk back to negative thoughts and to reframe them into positive ones and have a different way of thinking, there is a different way to look at that. And it was easier to practice gratitude. It was just like a whole mind shift.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this, what you're saying reminds me of, this was actually a TikTok video I saw recently for like a therapist who also has a TikTok account. And I appreciate what she puts out, her different snippets and things. And she had said something about how, typically therapists also have therapists. And she's like, it's not because like we could tell ourselves the information, but it's a relationship. And it's not as effective outside of having a relationship. And I'm like, I completely agree with that. And I think that goes back to our design as being relational beings. And so, yeah, I could walk around and just be like, okay, well, what would I say to a client? Well, this is what I would say. It's not the same as like having a conversation with someone. And so there's so much
Right.
value and another person who, that saying people have probably heard about, like holding space for someone. I'm like, it's about like being there and listening and caring about what's being said, oftentimes more than it is about what's being said back. But therapists can
Yeah.
ask really great questions. And so that gets us to think in different ways because they are listening so well and they remember things from when we talked the last time. And so there's just so many benefits I think that would be lost even in the neurofeedback process if we didn't also have that relationship going alongside it.
That's so true. I was just with my therapist yesterday, and she brought this whole new perspective to a situation where I was like, wow, I didn't even think about it that way. And it gave me so much peace. It
Mm.
was so helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, and so finding that trusted person, who can offer that to you. And of course, if you find that the people are not one and the same, it's not like Alexandra, who you can do the talk therapy with and the neurofeedback with. Oftentimes you can find a team that's willing to talk with one another, and you kind of get this whole team around you, which is also such a gift if someone needs to go that route, whether they're looking at neurofeedback and talk therapy or whatever that looks like. I know there's times where we at beEmboldened, if someone is having more of a clinical need and we're working outside of, state bounds. And so we're not able to practice in that regard. So it's like, well, we're happy to partner with your therapist in your state to share more about spiritual abuse and help communicate that for you, like what that experience is and some of the nuances of it and things like that. And so we can create more of a team approach for somebody so that they ultimately are getting their needs met.
Yes, I think that is absolutely wonderful. It is so important to find, a therapist that you really click with, like what you were talking about with the relationship. That's what I tell all my clients, it's like it's so important to have that click with your therapist because otherwise then the therapy isn't going to work. So I tell my clients, I'm like, I'm not going to be offended if we don't click. What's important is for you to find someone who you really feel connected with and feel safe with, secure, because therapists, like another benefit to a therapist is they're not going to tell anyone what you're telling them. Like if you're telling a friend, if you're telling a family member, that is helpful. And we do need those people in our lives. But then there might always be like, are they going to go and tell someone? But with the therapist, they are going to sit there with an unbiased, unjudgmental perspective.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.